Welcome back, everyone. Today's video, we're diving into Chapter 22 of the American Yawp. This is the Roaring Twenties. Now, this chapter highlights the transformative decades of the 1920s. It's a time of dramatic social change, economic growth. Post-war America is rapidly changing. Cultural innovations are taking hold within America. So let's get started on this, what is predominantly a culture chapter and a study in cultural history. In the 1920s, this was marked by significant economic growth, and we call it the Roaring Twenties just because of that tremendous economic growth and cultural growth. And following the end of World War I, the United States had emerged as a leading economic power. We're producing all kinds of things that's keeping the world going during this very devastating war. Innovations in manufacturing and a boom in consumer goods are going to transform the American economy throughout the 1920s. Now, Henry Ford, who's known for not inventing the automobile but making a better way of producing it, is going to revolutionize production with the assembly line, making cars more affordable for the average Americans. And the rise of consumer culture saw the proliferation of radios, household appliances, and other consumer goods, creating a sense of modernity and convenience in everyday life. And so what are we seeing? Life's getting a little easier because we have more stuff to help make it easier. And of course, those things cost money, and we're going to start to see increased buying on credit. Buy now, pay later. Now, the social landscape of the 1920s, it's going to undergo significant changes as well, particularly for women. The flapper is going to emerge as a symbol of the decade. It represents a new kind of woman who embraced freedom, style, and independence. And part of what brings this about was because during World War II, women start to give up the heavy steel-boned corsets. Out of one, women are starting to go into the workplace, and that's not a conducive type of clothing to wear 10 pounds of clothing and undergarments when you're working in a hot factory. And so they're giving those things up. In fact, it's said that women traded in their steel-boned corsets, and there was enough steel there to make, I believe it's 2 battleships that the United States will construct during the World War I era. Now, flappers are going to challenge traditional gender roles. They're wearing shorter dresses. They're cutting their hair into bobs, shorter hairstyles, again, because you're working in a factory. You don't want to get long hair caught up in the machines. And participating in nightlife and environment. These are young women, by the way. And, of course, the 19th Amendment, which was ratified right at the beginning of the decade, is going to grant women the right to vote, and that's going to further bring about a sense of empowerment in the public sphere. Now, the Roaring Twenties is often referred to as the Jazz Age because jazz music becomes the soundtrack of the era. African-American musicians like Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington are going to gain fame, and jazz clubs are going to flourish, particularly in urban centers like New York City. And where does this music come from? Much of it originates in southern cities like New Orleans and Biloxi. And it's going to travel north up the river, up into cities like Chicago and New York during this period called the Great Migration. Because during World War I, there's a need for workers. Well, many of the white men are off fighting. You've got African-American units too. We're in a segregated military. That's a fact. But there's not enough people to work. That's why women are getting into the workforce. And there are recruiters that go into the South and recruit African-American families to move north to go to work in these factories. They're bringing their culture and they're bringing their music with them. And so that's where jazz starts to be integrated into, again, like Detroit and Chicago and New York City. And, of course, in Harlem, that's where you really sort of see this idea of the jazz culture, the jazz age. Now, the Harlem Renaissance, this is a cultural movement that's going to celebrate African-American literature and art and identity. And figures like Langston Hughes and Zora Neale Hurston are going to emerge as key voices. And they're going to highlight rich cultural contributions of African-Americans during this period, too. There's this sort of this pride in the black community. Now, despite cultural flourishing, in the 1920s are also going to face a number of challenges, and most notably the implementation of Prohibition with the 18th Amendment back in 1920. This was aimed to eliminate the consumption of alcohol. It was the continuation of the old temperance dream, but it's going to lead to unintended consequences. Prohibition is going to fuel organized crime. Bootlegging and speakeasies will become rampant. Gangsters like Al Capone are going to capitalize on the illegal alcohol trade, and it's going to lead to a rise in violence and corruption, especially as various mob bosses are going to fight for territory. So you have turf wars that begin to break out. And the public begins to have a growing disillusionment with Prohibition. And ultimately, it will be repealed in 1933 by the Franklin Roosevelt administration because alcohol is real easy to tax. And if we're in the middle of a Great Depression, which we will be when we talk about next chapter, the money that can be raised off of tax revenue of alcohol can do a whole lot of social programs. Not only that, it becomes difficult to arrest anyone that's breaking the law. Not when the judges and the police and the sheriffs and all the folks responsible for enforcing those laws are riding among the rest of them, drinking and carousing and having fun too, in these secret underground bars called speakeasies. Now, how secret were they really when everybody knew about them? But secret underground bars called speakeasies. They got their name because you'd knock on the door and you would speak easy the password quietly. Hey, what's the password? You know what the password is. We'll let you in. So we have that going on. Now, I mentioned the Great Migration a moment ago and how it had begun to shift these cultural and various other things up north with the movement of African Americans. So let's get into that a bit more. The 1920s, this significant demographic shift, Great Americans, we're going to see millions of African Americans moving from the rural South to urban centers in the North. And again, what is the real? Well, first, for jobs. They're looking for jobs, well-paying jobs. And plus, maybe to escape the discrimination that they had experienced in those areas that they were in. Maybe better pay or a bigger community of folks like themselves. And so there's several opportunities here that many are taking advantage of. And again, millions are taking advantage of. Now, this migration, of course, won't be without challenges. Racial tensions are going to occur in the North just like they were occurring in the South. This influx of African Americans into northern cities is going to cause certain shifts within the city. The part of New York known as Harlem had been traditionally a white neighborhood some years before, but again, shifting migration patterns and the growth of suburbs had left that area largely empty. And so this is going to be where folks begin to move into. The 1920s will see the resurgence of the Ku Klux Klan, which hadn't been around since the 1870s. It had kind of gone away because what it had done, it had ended Reconstruction. It had forced the carpetbaggers out of the South for the most part. And but in the 1920s and the late 1910s, Ku Klux Klan are going to come back with a larger list of folks that they hate. Race riots are going to start to break out, like the Chicago race riots in 1919. And this underscores the persistent struggles of racial inequality. Now, going back to the Klan, not only are they out for African Americans, but also they are very anti-immigrant at this point. That wasn't really an aspect of them at the end of the Civil War during the Reconstruction. So they're casting a much larger net on the folks that they don't like and the folks that they are sort of waging their war against. Now, as the decade progressed, signs of economic trouble began to emerge. The stock market begins to experience rapid growth. We start to see speculation, uneven wealth distribution begin to hint at instability. And so ultimately, this is going to lead us to the stock market crash of 1929. And this is going to lead to the Great Depression. Just the exuberance of the decade is going to be overshadowed by economic despair because by the time we get to 1930, folks are losing their jobs, businesses are failing. There are folks that have borrowed money to buy all these nice new things, but now you've lost your job or your wages have been cut. You can't continue to pay those debts. And so it becomes a big problem. Now, I've mentioned before, sometimes I'll throw out movies that I think do a pretty good job of illustrating the point. And both of these are sports movies. So one of them is called The Legend of Bagger Vance, Will Smith movie, golf movie. It's probably the movie that most golfers know about. And so you might check that one out. Deals with the Great Depression in a small Georgia town. And then Seabiscuit is another one. Horse racing movie, but it does really good too. Oh, and one more, Cinderella Man with Russell Crowe. It's awesome as well. He's a boxer and he's caught up in the hardships of the Great Depression. And two of the three of those are true stories. So you might go back and check those out. Now, in summary, Chapter 22 will explore the dynamic and transformative decade of the 1920s and talk about the economic growth, cultural innovation, social change. Some things we didn't really talk about was the sports aspect and the movie aspect. Maybe I'll do another video to follow this one up once this one has been sent out into the universe. But the rising consumerism and the jazz age, these are going to be the challenges of Prohibition. racial tensions. All of these things are going to make and help us see that this is a very complex period of American history. So thanks for joining me in this. I know it's not complete, and I will try to follow this up with maybe a few more details that didn't make the cut on this particular video. But if you find this helpful, let me know. If you want to like it, you want to subscribe it, that's entirely up to you. And as I post out smaller little videos, then I'll see what I can do for you. You'll be the first to know. You guys take care, and good luck on your tests and on your studies as you move forward.